conservation is not always about science. It's about the people. It's about managing people, but allowing those people to manage their coastline. A lot of times when we talk about ocean conservation, we hear these massive initiatives to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. Examples like that. You've heard me say that. And during those initiatives, the people who live on the coastline don't always get a voice. That's the same as the sort of the top-down sort of people pushing those initiatives. And there's a justice behind that. And people are now realizing that without having people, the people who are in the local areas administrating and implementing and following the rules for that conservation, conservation doesn't really happen. So today we're going to be talking about ocean justice, why it's important, and why the people who live in local areas where conservation is done need a voice just as much as people that are on the top. That's on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And I'm very happy to present you this episode. This episode is to promote a conference that I kept seeing my friend Angelo Villagomez promote around, this is Oceans Week, happy Oceans Week, by the way, folks. And a lot of times when we talk about Oceans Week, there are sort of these big initiatives that are happening, and people are talking about the ocean all over the place. And some of the stories don't always get and the events don't always get the press that I feel that it deserves. And this is why I have this podcast. So when my friend Angelo Villagomez was promoting this conference, this one-day, really half-a-day conference called Upwell, A Wave of Ocean Justice, I wanted to say to him, and I did, I just reached out to him. I said, hey man, why don't you come on the podcast and let's talk about this conference and what it's designed to do, what you hope to get out of it. And I wanted to tell my audience, because my audience is always looking for information on this, on ocean justice and ocean conservation, and how do we effectively put ocean conservation into practice and what goes into that. And ocean justice has become a huge part of ocean conservation. And so having Angelo on, as well as Anupa Asokan, who joined him, it is amazing just to hear what is going on with ocean justice and who the people are that are going to speak at this conference, the panels that they're going to have, the conversations that they're going to have, I think is really important. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to be a part of it, which you can be on June 7th at 12:30 Eastern. This conference is going to start, and you can register in the link in the show notes, but you can also watch it on YouTube live. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's available for anybody. I think it's going to be really important that people attend virtually and be able to be a part of these conversations. So without further ado, here is Anupa Asokan and Angelo Villagomez talking about Upwell, A Wave of Ocean Justice conference that's going to happen on June 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern, or 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Enjoy, and I'll talk to you after. Hey Anupa, hey Angelo, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the Upwell conference?
So ready.
Hey man, it's always good to be on the show.
Well, I'm glad both of you are ready. This is exciting. I'm very excited for this. I've seen a lot of posts on this on Twitter and other places, and I'm excited for this conference. I think it's going to be something that is definitely needed in ocean conservation. Something that's not talked a lot about, and of course, I don't see a lot of action taken around sort of the ocean justice sort of, topic or area of study. And that's probably just me not being sort of in that world a lot. But it's also something that I feel like we need to discuss. So I want to have you both on to not only promote the conference, but also talk about some of the panels that will be discussed and how people can get access to it even during and then afterwards as well. So before we get into all of that, why don't we just have each of you tell us who you are and what you do. Anupa, why don't you start off?
Great. Thanks so much for having me on. My name is Anupa Asokan. I'm an ocean advocate for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. I basically advocate to help protect our ocean so that we can continue to enjoy and play in it in the future. And when I'm not advocating for the ocean, I am playing in the ocean. I love to surf, love to fish. I stand up paddleboard long distances just for fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. I've tried paddleboarding. It was not made for me. I have no balance and fall every single time. Even
you just need a bigger paddleboard.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. Okay, I have a lot of questions for you in terms of with NRDC and things like that, but we'll get to you in a second. Angelo, why don't you remind people, you've been on this podcast quite a number of times, so why don't you just remind the folks of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, Andrew, I think I was actually like maybe your third or your sixth interview ever.
I feel like it was three. Number
10
3
years ago.
Yes.
Number 3. Yeah. Long time ago.
Absolutely.
So Angelo Villagomez, I work for an organization called the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. I am also an ocean advocate. And I would say my advocacy these days are for just well-designed and implemented marine protected areas, among other things. I also love having fun in the ocean. I'm an avid scuba diver and a mediocre ukulele player.
I would say better than mediocre. I'm going to say that. I enjoy your serenades on the on Twitter when you do your live serenades. It's always fun.
Well, it's like karaoke. You know, it's 99% enthusiasm.
That's true. And how's your stand-up paddleboard game, since we're discussing it?
I also am not the greatest paddleboarder, and maybe I just need a bigger paddleboard.
Maybe that's what we need. That's what we need.
I don't surf either. Like, I'm not cool like Anupa. Like, my thing at the beach is I kind of like just to like sit on the sand, maybe like drink a beer.
Hey,
these days.
Also fun.
Yeah, so fun after a good day of surfing, right? Right on. Well, we have an idea. I mean, as Angelo mentioned, he's been on the podcast quite a bit. So we kind of know of Angelo's past and sort of, you know, how he's gotten into, especially marine protected areas and diving into even further into marine protected areas and talking about a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But Anupa, let's just get a little background on you. You're involved in fisheries and marine protected areas, advocating for fisheries and marine protected areas. How did you get into that? Where did that interest sort of derive from?
Well, so I grew up fishing. That was my first connection to the ocean. My dad loved to fish, and it's just something that I kind of took on as a hobby and activity, and it stuck with me. And that was sort of my gateway ocean activity. From there, I took up stand-up paddleboarding, diving, surfing, all the things. I actually went to college for film school, but took an oceanography course and was like, oh, this is a thing I could do.
Really?
And then it kind of opened all the doors for me, and I've stuck with it. I do a lot of work with the Surfrider Foundation as well. I volunteered with them for a long time, and now I'm on the board. And their tagline is "Protect and Enjoy," and that's sort of the motto I started living by.
It.
Yeah.
Have you ever used sort of your background in film and like for your communication skills when doing this type of work?
Not that I have done the filmmaking, but there's an awesome duo down in San Diego, Surfgrass Productions, and they reached out to me so I could kind of tell my story as a fisherwoman. I fish from shore. I live in Los Angeles, California. So I fish from shore on the beach and work on marine protected areas. And that's kind of a unique angle that you don't hear about in marine protected area advocacy. I'm sure there are lots of us, but we don't often come out in support of having these conserved areas where you can't fish. So I was able to tell my story, and they did a much better job of putting it together than I probably would have.
Well, we'll have to have you back on, because I feel like there's a whole episode that we can talk about your background and sort of how you got involved in your work at NRDC and fishing in general. And maybe maybe you can send me that link. Is that video up?
It is, yeah. It's
produced
on YouTube. I can send it to you.
Perfect. If you can send that link, we'll share it in the show notes so people can get more of a background on you. That'd be wonderful. And so how long have you been at NRDC then?
It's been a year. I was doing some work for them, kind of on the side in combination with a couple other organizations.
Oh yes,
but I've
that's
definitely
the marine conservation hustle, right?
Yes, definitely. I spent a few years at NOAA in DC, done the nonprofit circuit a little bit as well. But I found a very great and supportive home with the ocean team at NRDC, and I'm really enjoying it.
That's awesome. Because a lot of times with NRDC, you don't expect a lot of oceans to be talked about, but they do have quite I guess a division or department for oceans, right?
Yeah, and I work with a lot of amazing and very smart and effective people in the ocean conservation world. So I'm learning a lot as well.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay. So that's great. And again, like I'd like to invite you back on to talk about your whole story, and we'll spend a whole 30, 40 minutes talking about that, because I think we can have a lot of fun with that. But we're here to talk about Upwell, a wave of ocean justice. And that's a conference that's going to happen on June 7th. It's going to start, I believe, was it 12:30 to 4:30 Eastern? Is that, I believe that's
on Wednesday, June 7th.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about why this conference.
Well, I guess it's meant to be it's a symposium on ocean justice. And I would say it's, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, the ocean conservation community, among other conservation communities and other aspects of our entire society, have started to pay attention to diversity, inclusion, and of course, justice. And the idea of what is ocean justice, to be honest, I think it's something that is still being developed. I'm a part of this grouping of individuals and NGOs called the Ocean Justice Forum, and we came up with a definition for what we think ocean justice is. And it's sort of that it exists at the intersection of social inclusion, ocean stewardship, and justice. But I do think this is a new concept. Even like with marine protected areas, which have a very strong definition and a lot of experience, as a community, we're still learning about them. We're still exploring them, and that's kind of what conservation is all about. So this is a 4-hour symposium. It's going to be mostly virtual, but we will have maybe about 150 people participating in person. And we're going to be in Washington, D.C. All of the speakers are going to be in person. And we're going to talk about the different aspects of what ocean justice means.
Anupa, for you, like in terms of ocean justice, NRDC is essentially, known to be involved in sort of the justice game, the advocacy game. How did they get involved in all of this?
NRDC is also part of the Ocean Justice Forum, and has been pretty active participants in that. Not me particularly, but some of my colleagues. Right. And I mean, I think like any organization, NRDC has done a lot of work, or has had to do a lot of work to really understand their part in sort of the systemic, marginalization of different communities, and how we can be better, and how we can be better at kind of supporting community efforts, uplifting local community efforts, rather than kind of going in and parachute conservation or whatever the issue might be. And, I'm really proud of my colleagues for being so thoughtful about and open-minded about a lot of these issues. And I think we're all learning together. And I'm really excited about this conference as a way to share those ideas and share the strides that we have made and what we can do and do better.
That's great. Sorry, go ahead, Angelo.
No, and Andrew, just, conservation in general and ocean conservation in particular has just not always been a welcoming space for people from marginalized communities. I'm like you, I was born in the 70s, graduated from college in, the early 2000s. And, I was coming up through conservation. I was like 10 or 15 years in before I realized that there were no other Pacific Islanders working around me. And, the number of Black men or Black women or Hispanic men, Hispanic women that you see at all. I mean, the numbers are extremely low. And then when you consider, people in leadership positions or on boards, it's like the number of people of color, Indigenous, Black, you name it. are just not involved in conservation.
Right.
And, one of the reasons it was so hard for me, or one of the reasons I didn't notice right away, is because I was actually doing a lot of work out in the islands. I was doing work in the Caribbean, and I was doing work across the Pacific. And on every island that I went to, dozens of conservation professionals working on the front lines of climate and of conservation, working on fishing issues, working on marine protected areas. But when I came back to Washington, D.C., to the halls of power, to the places where the money is, where the decisions are made, almost no representation whatsoever. And so a huge aspect of ocean justice is going to be ocean human resources, which is bringing these people and these voices into the conservation movement. And, we're seeing it at some of the lower levels of our conservation, like and the panel that I'm hosting is called The Changing Definition of Conservation Success. And I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we're going to bring these people and these perspectives and these experiences into ocean conservation. And what Upwell is doing is it's creating a stage. It's creating a forum where those voices can be highlighted, because they've just not been listened to. They've not been heard. And we want to change that.
I that's kind of leads into what my next question was going to be, or answers part of what my next question was going to be. Is a lot of the times when we think of just justice in 2023, especially, obviously not just with everything that happened in 2020 and with George Floyd, but even before that. But that conversation really accelerated after 2020, just in every aspect of our lives. But I find when we apply it to oceans, we don't really have we don't really talk about the examples of oceans. We talk about climate. We've heard some people some marginalized communities who live in areas that are beside like refineries and so forth. But we don't really hear about it in oceans, in ocean conservation, or in oceans as much, like the examples. Obviously, talking about just ocean conservation, the field within which we all work, we definitely see that disproportionate sort of power, that hasn't shifted, or not seeing a lot of diversity coming through the ranks at the leadership roles and so forth, but definitely seeing it at the local levels where the action is actually taking place. Can we talk also about examples that we see sort of in ocean conservation, that doesn't normally get talked about? Can you talk about some of the examples of ocean justice or injustice that we see right now?
Angelo looks like he's ready to say something, but
I guess I'll jump in, only because Anupa told me that I could go first. Yeah. One thing to think about is the placement of marine protected areas. And if you look at, I actually, in 2016, I used to work at an organization called the Pew Charitable Trusts. And we were the lead sponsor of the resolution at the International Union for Conservation of Nature to protect 30% of the ocean. And if you read the language, it talked about protecting 30% of every ocean habitat. And so if you were to follow that advice, what you'd end up with is on the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, Pacific, Alaska, Caribbean, you'd have this patchwork of protected areas where you're protecting mangroves and oyster beds, seagrasses, sea marshes, pelagic areas, and you'd see like this. It'd be a patchwork of different type of protected areas. And that's what you would get if all we did was follow science when we implement these ideas. But politics and economics also play a huge role in where we're allowed to fish and what gets protected. And so what's happened in the United States in the last 15 to 20 years is that all of the protected areas have ended up in places where the people have the least power. And these are the U.S. Pacific territories. I'm from the U.S. Pacific territory, so we're not allowed to vote for president. We don't have to pay taxes, which is nice, but we don't have representation in Congress. And so what's happened is 26% of the U.S. EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, is protected in marine protected areas, but 96% of that is in Hawaii and the U.S. Pacific territories. Now, it would be fair if we were then 96% of the budget Or if
Right.
we were 96% of the communications or 96% of the community that comes to Washington, D.C. to go to conferences, and if we were 96% of the scientists at the universities. But the reality is like, it's like me and two other people
Right.
who get invited into these, the fancy places. And it's the people back at home are just kind of on the island, and we the money doesn't come to our islands. And so that's how justice plays out with marine protected areas. I could get a similar yet different example with fishing. Give a similar yet different example with pollution. We could also talk about ocean access, like who gets to use the ocean. So it really does, when you spend some time and you think about these issues, it really does affect all aspects of ocean management and ocean conservation.
Interesting. I never would have thought about it that way. So that definitely when you talk about those percentages and the amount of budget that goes to those areas, it just makes it sound like a lot of times those areas were chosen obviously for their resources, but also because maybe they're in remote places, and so there's not as much conflict when they put them in. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, there's less conflict because the people have less power.
Anupa, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I was just going to dig in a little bit more to that last thing that Angelo mentioned on access. My marine protected area work is mostly focused on California and our state waters and our coastal network of MPAs. But I think a lot about what access means, because a big part of our 30 by 30 initiative in the state, and it was adopted federally as well, was equitable access to coastal areas. And for me, I've spent a lifetime going out and playing in the ocean. And only recently did I really look and realize I'm often the only person of color that's in the surf lineup, or launching my paddleboard at the marina, or out, fishing, or whatever the activity might be. And there's a lot of different things that play into that access conversation and making access equitable, right? It's not just like being able to afford parking or afford the transportation to get to a space, but is it clean? Like, are there animals in the water where you're allowed to go to? Do people make you feel welcome, or are, you getting the side eye or racist comments or whatever the thing might be? So there's a lot that goes into that. And I think, having representation at an event like Upwell is a great start, but that has to play out in the spaces that we're protecting as well.
It's super easy for a conversation like this just to turn into one mega 4-hour bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to talk about some of this bummer stuff. And because that's a big part of ocean justice, is that, the flip side of that coin is that there's ocean injustice.
Right.
And so we talk about some of the negative things, but we're also going to propose changes and, ways to make it better. And there's two of the three panels are focused around that idea. And the one that I'm hosting is changing definitions of conservation success. And then Anupa is on one about ocean joy, because they're actually yes, these things are hard. Yes, these things are unjust, but I've been doing it for 20 years. And I still care about these issues.
Of course.
Still, I find happiness and joy in the work that I do. And so we also want to talk about that aspect of the work.
Yeah, and for me, I just wanted to give an idea of what, when we talk about sort of the injustices that are out there and some of the examples, people may not realize it off the bat. So it's always good to highlight them. Now with this conference, as you mentioned, we're going to be talking about, you're going to be talking about just sort of different ways that people have been working within this area and how to share those voices. For Angelo, for your session on sort of, it's a new wave of ocean climate leadership. Is that the one?
Yes, that's me.
So that's always an interesting one when people think about just climate change in general. It's a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around when sort of if you're not involved in ocean conservation, just sort of the person who's just running their daily lives, and they think about it every time you talk about climate change, they'll be like, yeah, we're, a lot of them be like, we're screwed. We're, what are we gonna do? What can we do? And there's a lot of like hopelessness when we talk about climate change. So when we talk about redefining success, what is the definition of success now in general for conservation?
Yeah, I think we're in a moment right now where everybody's talking about 30 by 30.
Right.
And I already talked a little bit about how I was one of the architects of that movement.
Yeah.
And I do believe in 30 by 30. One of the great things about it is it's got buy-in at the highest levels of government all across the world, from Joe Biden to Macron to all these presidents across South America. So let's use that, right? But it really should be thought of more as a framework, in this idea that there are some places that are sacred. There are some places where you won't log, where you won't have fishing. But we also need condos, and we need schools, and we need firehouses and roads and all those other things. And when you think of it through the 30 by 30 framework, it's this idea that there's like some balance in our physical world where and protected areas play a part of that. We can have an academic argument over what does protected mean? What does conserved mean? Should it be 10%? Should it be 30%? Should it be 50%? Again, that's just like an academic argument, and you can argue till you're blue in the face. But this idea that some areas are sacred, and that we have high level buy-in from across the world, that's the real strength of 30 by 30. But we also need to recognize that the definition of conservation success is constantly evolving. Like every 2 or 3 years, we were not talking about justice 5 years ago. 7 years ago, we were barely talking about climate change, which I think for young people, they would find that crazy. Because they would probably say, why would you say the word crazy, Angelo? That's such a the way we talk, the way it changes, and climate and justice are the leading ideas in conservation today. But again, in my lifetime, it was other things. We talked about save the whales, save the rainforest, biodiversity. Right. And years before that, it was wilderness, and then years before that, it was scenic landscapes. And with this changing of the guard that we're seeing today, where marginalized voices are being brought into conservation leadership positions, they're just going to look at the world differently, and they're going to define conservation differently. And I'm not ready to announce what the next definition of conservation success is going to be. But the people that look like the people on the stage at Upwell are going to play a significant role in defining that and defining the conservation movement for the next 10 to 20 years.
And to that point, though, I also think that the definition of like conservation success is going to look different in different places around the world. I'm doing work in California, and even in California, different sections of the coast have different threats and different challenges. So how we approach them in these areas is going to be very different.
Yeah. And Angela, you mentioned also earlier that, when we talked about the 30% representation of different habitats, that was based on science. We've definitely seen that human dimension come into play over the last, 10 years. And playing more of a role, even when we talk about who's going to be leading conservation in local areas across the world, and everybody has different goals and different accomplishments that they want to achieve. That's a difficult thing to manage, and representation is a big part of that, because a lot of these places are remote. They may or may not need resources. They may or may not need help. How do we move forward? Like, what is that going to look like? Is that just more of providing them with voices so that when we get people in like the larger NGOs who are working in those areas that work with these local communities, the local communities get a better voice with them? Is that the thing? Like, how?
Well, I'm gonna quote my hero, and I'd like to call her my good friend, Dr. Asha DeVos from Sri Lanka. Her line is, "Every coastline needs a hero," and so we have to do this around the world. The other thing that Dr. DeVos says is that talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. So, there are, earlier I talked about the stories when I was working in the Caribbean and I was working in the Pacific, and every island I went to, there were people around me who were working in conservation who had brilliant ideas. We need to support those people. And we need to support them in the places where they're working, but increasingly we also need to create opportunities for them to be a part of like the big organizations that drive the conservation movement around the world. So yeah, Asha DeVos is a very smart lady. You should have her on your show.
She's
you?
She's been on a number of times. She's a very busy woman, and because she's so amazing that a lot of people have her to speak for her. So and whenever I can, I have her on the program. So
I actually tried to get her to be a speaker at Upwell, but she's on a boat this week.
Yes.
If you follow her on Twitter, she's
tough life, just hanging out with whales on a boat.
Yeah.
And I love it. She live streams, I think a lot of it, which is very fun because you get envious when you watch it, but you're also like, this is quite
so
amazing,
envious, but she's amazing. Yeah.
She's absolutely amazing. One of the hardest workers I've ever met. So yeah. And I think it's really interesting to have these conversations. With the panelists, how did sort of the organizing committee go about choosing the people who are going to be on this panelist?
Well, since I'm a part of the organizing committee, I guess I'm probably the one who would answer that. So it's being hosted at the Center for American Progress.
Okay.
It's going to be in my office. And it's overall, it's being hosted by ASUL, Center for American Progress, and then Urban Ocean Lab. And then we have the support of Earth Justice, NRDC, the Ocean Defense Initiative, and then Green 2.0. And it was done by committee. That's the short version.
Okay.
But then ultimately what we did is we called upon our contacts and reached out to folks that we knew. We are going to have we're flying some people in. Some people are already in DC.
Nice.
And, we were looking for people who were leaders in the field and who had some really interesting experiences. I was looking, and we were also looking to make sure that any person watching our conference saw themselves on the stage. So we made sure that we had a diversity of age. So I think our youngest person will be 21. I don't know how old our oldest person would be, and they probably wouldn't want me to tell.
Right, old enough.
But across education levels, across geographies, across ethnic backgrounds, we also spent some time thinking about gender, sexual identity, and ability. We really tried to make sure that we were inclusive and brought together a really diverse group. On the panel that I organized, I have a 21-year-old Samoan Yupik, recent college graduate. I have a recently finished Ray Fellow who is very early in her career. I've got my buddy from Jamaica who has worked he's navigated academia, he's navigated this is one person, academia, government, and now NGOs. And so he's got a lot of good experience of trying to move stuff within institutions that don't like to move. So I'm hoping that he can kind of talk about that through the different sectors that we have. And then all of the panels have also similar levels of diversity of thought and experience. And not everybody is necessarily an ocean conservation expert. We've brought in some folks who are adjacent, who kind of talk about it, parallel to what's going on the ocean.
Very nice, very nice. And Anupa, you are one of the panelists on the Ocean Joy Justice in Action session. Can you talk a little bit about that session?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the person asking the questions, so I'm just really excited to dive into the reasons why I love the ocean and the things that we get to do and ways that we get to enjoy it. I'm excited to meet two of the fellow panelists that I've never met before, but I have met Gigi Lucas, who started Surfyar Negra out in Jacksonville, Florida. So Florida's my home state. And, she and I have connected before, and she's doing some amazing work teaching young people of color how to surf and creating a place of joy and community in the ocean around surfing. And she's just an amazing human. So I'm excited to share the stage with her and meet my fellow panelists.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I mean, to look at it, it really is a lot of it's people who look like they have a great time using the ocean especially from a recreational aspect. So from your perspective, looking at justice and action, what do you think you bring to the panelist table, or what are you looking forward to bringing to the panelist
that's like
table,
an existential question.
It is.
Well, mostly I'm looking forward to learning. And then, it's always fun to share my stories and experiences of time spent playing in the ocean. I think I'm bringing the perspective of a fisherwoman, just a recreational ocean user, in the sort of consumptive sense that tends to own the conversations around ocean conservation, but those people don't often look like me. And so, yeah, I think
that's it.
I'm more excited to learn than I am to contribute, but I hope that I have things to contribute.
I'm sure
and things to teach people. So
I'm sure you do. Well, I mean, just in terms of experience as well, right? In California, as you mentioned, not a lot of people that fish and even surf may look like you. And so bringing that to the table and bringing that experience and sort of sometimes it's representation, being like, oh, there are people who surf that look like me. I think that's a huge aspect of that. Just to be able to speak to that, I think could be a game changer in itself. So I think that's awesome. Now, a little bit of a fun question: if you had a choice to do for the rest of your life, would you pick fishing or would you pick surfing?
Oh no. I don't know that I can answer that question.
That's a tough question.
Can I surf and
I was about to say, could you fish from a paddleboard? That'd be a difficult.
I could. I have before.
Okay, well there you go. You can do both. You can do both. I'm not going to make you choose. I was just wondering to see which one you love the most. But they're very fun activities.
Yeah. I guess the fishing gives me some food. So
that's true. I gotcha. I have to admit, paddleboard. I've seen people paddleboard on the Pacific Ocean, and to get out into sort of a calmer water and having to get off the shore, like in those initial waves, those break waves, it looks terrifying sometimes. I don't know how you get over those.
Not always waves gracefully, but
Gotcha. That's awesome. Okay, so this is great. Like we've talked about the two of the panels. We didn't get to talk, and I know not necessarily you're all going in on the third panel, but it's talking ocean policy. What makes it just? I feel like that's obviously a very important, because the people who sort of put forward the policy, the people who are advocating for the policy, usually it tends to be the people who have the most influence, larger NGOs, things like that. That makes a big difference when we're talking about policy and really putting stuff into law and stuff into, when we talk about justice. It seems to be really interesting, the panel that's out there, obviously talking about policy, but what's the idea behind that? What's the idea for the outcomes, or what's going to be like talked about?
Well, I'll let them speak for themselves. So Helen is on the panel with Creation Justice Ministries, and she's my co-lead for the ocean on the America the Beautiful Coalition. So she's going to be able to talk about on the national scale. Mm-hmm. Colette with Taproot Earth is down in the Gulf, and there are some real issues of climate, drilling, mm-hmm. and fishing. So really complicated communities down there. And then Carlos with National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. Really, he's been in that job for just a year, or maybe less than a year. Mm-hmm. He used to work at Azul, which is one of the co-sponsors. Right. He's also a really great guy. So I actually don't know what they're going to talk about, and I look forward to the conversation.
We have to leave a little mystery to hook people and get them to tune in, right?
So your listeners should join in and hear what they have to say.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. And what I like about this, you can go up and I'm going to put the link to sign up in the show notes and to give more of a description so people can look at who's on the panel and so forth. But, so people can sign up and register. But did you also mention that it'll be available publicly live on is it
Yeah,
on
it's
YouTube?
it's going to be on the YouTube. So the Center for American Progress has a YouTube channel, and it's already up there. You can navigate there and click on it, and it'll notify you when it
Right.
starts. The other thing that if you navigate to the Center for American Progress website while the event is happening, there will be a bar on it that
Perfect.
says "Happening Now."
Yeah.
Click this to go over to our YouTube page, and you can participate that way. And then it'll be online for the rest of history until somebody decides to take it down. And we'll probably, if somebody says something brilliant, we'll pull it down and throw it up on TikTok. That sorts of things.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's going to be something that's important. If you can't make it during that time, highly recommend that people watch it afterwards. And I'm sure it's going to be something that you can refer to over and over and over again. There's going to be a lot of conversations, a lot of people talking, and I think this is the beginning of something that's going to be quite beautiful in the future to be able to build upon. So I want to thank both of you for not only being on this, but being a part of this Upwell conference.
Awesome.
And I think
Yeah.
I know I'm looking forward to attending it, and it's going to be definitely something that we're going to learn a lot. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll put the links in there. Please register. You can register anytime you want, and please attend. And I'd love to hear what people think about it. And then maybe we can have both of you on, and maybe some other panelists afterwards to talk about sort of the things that you learned from it, and things that you think you can build upon afterwards. So that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, thank you very much again for joining us. Really appreciate it, Anupa. I'm going to kind of bother you to come back on another time to be able to tell your full story, because I'm very interested in that. And Angelo, of course, I'm sure there's going to be a time where I'm going to ping you and be like, hey, you need to come on. We need to talk about something. So it's always great to have you both on, and thank you so much, and good luck with Upwell.
Thank you so much. Excited. Awesome. Thanks for having us too.
You bet. Thank you, Anupa and Angelo, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. Obviously, this is an important conversation or important conference where a lot of conversations are going to be had. And I think it's one of those conferences that needs to get the attention it deserves. And so that's why I invited Angelo and Anupa to be on the podcast. And to talk about this conference, and then why I'm going to invite them on after the conference to find out sort of the value that they got and what sort of the highlights of the conference that they thought deserved to be published, or to be able to be out to this audience and to other audiences as well. So I always want to highlight that for folks. I think it's important these conversations get amplified. And we get to do that on this podcast, and that's important. It's always interesting when you have these conversations. You're always learning in these situations. Conservation is sort of done almost like an adaptive management system, where you start to implement what you think it needs to happen, and then you find out all the things that could happen from it, but then you also find sort of the gaps and sort of what we need to improve on. And that's science, that's conservation, that's always what we're trying to improve on. And so adaptive management is going back and looking at how we could improve on different aspects of conservation, different aspects of science, different aspects of ocean justice. And you're always learning, you're always trying to look at the bigger picture, and you're always trying to bring together voices that may not be able to get amplified in the first place. And so I feel like that's really important. A lot of people who live along the coastline don't always get a chance to speak up about coastal conservation and ocean conservation. And that's a shame. And we need to do more of that. And that's part of that adaptive management. It's part of that going back and saying, hey, are we doing everything we can? Are we listening to everybody that has to say something? Is this something that we can improve upon? And I feel like with the technology that we have, with the ability to get people on social media, with the ability to get people behind a microphone and be able to amplify those voices is really, really important. And so we're going to start. And I mean, this is a starting of a new wave of ocean justice, just like Upwell stands for. And I think that's something that this podcast wants to be a part of. That's something I think we should all, be a part of, because we want the best for the ocean. And to have the best for the ocean, we need to listen to all the voices that live along the ocean. And I think that's really important. So I hope you are able to attend. If you are, please let me know what you thought of the conference. You can hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. All the links, including the video that Anupa shared with us at the beginning of this podcast, will be in the show notes. So please take a look at all those. If you want to sign up, the link will be there. I think it's really important that you do if you're interested. And again, let me know what you think. That's at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram of the conference. So thank you again for joining us on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. I am your host, Angelo, and have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.